President Zelensky has said Russia must not be rewarded for invading Ukraine, and his priorities during peace talks are maintaining sovereignty and ensuring strong security guarantees. President Zelensky was speaking in Paris, where he's been holding meetings with the French President Emmanuel Macron and rallying support from other European allies. President Putin is due to meet Donald Trump's envoy Steve Witkoff in Moscow tomorrow to discuss a US proposal for ending the war. Sticking points for Ukraine are reported to include Moscow's demand for legal recognition of seized territory. Well, in that news conference in Paris, President Zelensky said that the issue of territory was the most challenging issue.
We are also standing in our positions regarding the territories which are occupied by Russian forces now, and according to the Russian assets, and also to the reconstruction. And the stronger those positions would be, the stronger peace will be. And it depends not only on Ukraine, but also on our united positions with the US, and not only about when that war is finishing, but also our long-term actions after the war. All our partners must understand that.
Well, listening to that news conference was our correspondent in Brussels, Nick Beak, and this was his analysis.
We've seen how President Trump has attacked the Ukrainian leader time and again. It fluctuates, their relationship, but quite often he hits out at him. And so I think it fell to President Macron to say that, look, if there's going to be any agreement here, it has to be done with the Ukrainians, with their full consent, with their consultation. And I think it was interesting you were saying how the Europeans find themselves playing catch-up so often. President Macron sort of outlined that chronology, didn't he? The fact that the Americans and the Russians seem to get together, get an idea, and then it's left to the Europeans to scramble in any way they can to try and soften this or to massage it into something which many people would see who believe that Ukraine absolutely should be supported and protected here, to be massaged into something that is more acceptable to them. So the question is, will it have any impact? We know, because the French President's office have said today, that there has been a conversation between Presidents Zelensky, Macron, and also the American officials. We're hearing that conversation took place earlier. Steve Witkoff had a phone call with Mr. Macron and Mr. Zelensky. We don't know what was discussed then, but certainly that will be some sort of effort on behalf of the Europeans to send their message before Mr. Witkoff sits down with Vladimir Putin in Moscow tomorrow.
And earlier we heard from Kaja Kallas, and it's been very interesting in recent days. There have been reports on social media that the Americans have broadly sidestepped her just because of how robust her views are on this.
Yes, she is extremely hawkish when it comes to Russia. That is well known. And she said once again this morning that Russia absolutely has to pay for the crimes it has committed. She said it can't be the case that an aggressor is rewarded or can simply walk away from this. Now, that is all well and good. And she's being very strident in an idea at the moment that's come up to use those frozen Russian assets in Europe. And the idea being to take them and give them, or certainly loan them, to Ukraine. But the reality is, Matthew, on this and other issues to do with Ukraine, there is not this agreement throughout Europe. So, for example, Belgium, which generally has been pretty supportive of Ukraine, is saying that it can't sign up to this because all these funds are actually held in this country, in Belgium. And they've said today they go bankrupt if in the future there's a legal challenge and Russia wants the money back, if sanctions are lifted. They're also talking about the whole credibility of the financial system here in Belgium being undermined if these frozen assets were given to Ukraine. So there's big disagreement here. So we might well hear from the European leaders saying that there's absolutely solidarity, that they're shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, but that is not the full picture. And I think that only adds to this sense of unease people feel here. Many people feel throughout this continent that they're being completely sidelined in this process, and that it's Moscow and Washington that are really pushing this forward.
Nick Beak in Brussels. Let me tell you, just in the last few moments, Number 10 saying that Keir Starmer has had a call with Zelensky and Macron, stressing that they agreed on the importance of working towards a deal that delivered long-term security and a just peace for Ukraine. Also touching on what Nick was talking about, turning to ensuring Ukraine gets the equipment and support it needs for as long as it takes. The leaders discussed using the value of immobilized Russian sovereign assets, so the frozen assets, to support the regeneration of Ukraine and its armed forces. And finally, the statement says the leaders agreed to stay in close touch as intensive diplomatic discussions continue in the coming days. And that, of course, alluding to the fact that there's a meeting between the Americans and Russians in Moscow, and lots will flow out of that. So that the latest coming to us from Number 10.